Okay, next up we have Derrick Lewis versus Tai Tuivasa. Derrick Lewis coming in as a negative 190 favorite. Tuivasa coming in as a plus 160 underdog. And I feel like this is one of the easiest fights to analyze, because I feel like everybody knows what both of these guys are going to try to do, which is just knock the other guy's head off. There's not a lot of nothing super fancy about what either one of these guys does. I think there's good reason for that. Derrick Lewis, doesn't have a long background in boxing, kickboxing. He didn't grow up wrestling and doing karate, jiu-jitsu, and it's same with Tai Tuivasa. Both of these guys are just kind of like tough guys who got involved in MMA, and they're very big and they're very powerful and they can hit really hard. So I feel like that's the story of this match, really, is just that they're both really powerful strikers. I did go back though and just take a quick peek through their last fights to see, is there any way you can say one guy has the advantage over the other. And when I was watching the Derrick Lewis fight, Daukaus, he won by KO in his last fight, is that one thing that came to mind watching that fight is that Derrick Lewis is a very patient power striker. He's not someone who tries to just immediately rush in. He's not like Francis Ngannou versus Rosenstruck, where it looked like Ngannou was just pissed and he was a raging bull who just charged through some punches and was able to knock the guy out. He really sits back and waits for the right time. He knows what the best chance he has of winning is landing that one punch knockout, and so he doesn't get confused by trying to do too much crazy stuff. Although he does throw in an occasional crazy technique like a flying jump kick, flying knees, which I think is good for psychological reasons, but I've never seen him land a flying knee. I've never seen him land any of his flying jump kicks that he's done. But it is crazy that a guy that big can actually throw those techniques, so I do think it's entertaining to see him. But in that fight, there were a couple of things that stood out. One of the things you can see Derrick Lewis do very early on is, we've talked about before, is the bad striking defense technique of going straight backwards, multiple steps backwards. In the heavyweight division, maybe this isn't as big of a deal when most of the guys that you're going against are not going to be super fast. But one of the things about Tuivasa is I think he is a slightly faster heavyweight than lots of guys in the heavyweight division. So that could be a factor in this next fight. Derrick Lewis has also shown that he's vulnerable to leg kicks, in the sense that he never checks a leg kick. I don't think I've ever seen him check a leg kick. He'll just take them. The one thing he will do, though, is he will counter the leg kick by, a guy kicks him and then he comes back with a punch. He does have that counter in his arsenal, but we've seen in multiple fights where he just takes tons of leg kicks and has no answer back. And you can see that in his last fight, he ended up with, very early on with a long combination that ended up leading to a KO. So once he lands that damaging strike, he just goes into beast mode, throws everything into combos. Even if the guy's blocking, he tries to punch through his block because he knows he has such power that he can end up putting the guy out, and that's really his strategy. So I feel like there's only a few ways to beat Derrick, and I went back and actually looked at some of the other times that Derrick has lost in his career. He most recently lost to Gon, and then before that he ended up losing to Dos Santos. And with both of those guys, I feel like they're both faster, so I feel like that speed played a huge factor in both of those fights. He also ended up losing to Cormier, but he ended up winning against Blades. So I wouldn't say necessarily that like the way to beat Derrick Lewis is through wrestling, just because that's the way Cormier beat him. I feel like the way Cormier was able to beat him with wrestling, because Cormier also had some decent strikes and some setups with his wrestling. If you look at the Blades fight, clearly wrestling in itself is not, necessarily going to win you the fight. If all you have is wrestling, Derrick Lewis knows that also, and he's going to throw that, it uppercut from hell and just knock your head off like he did with Blades. He was just waiting for Blades to take the shot. He landed that uppercut and put Blades' lights out. So I feel like his vulnerabilities are his legs. If you have a speed advantage, that'll definitely play a factor. And then also the body, because that was one of the things that played a factor in his fight against Dos Santos, was Dos Santos landed a spinning back kick to the body of Derrick Lewis, and it, he crumpled over. He was bent over at the knee. But the thing about Derrick Lewis is even when he's wounded, he's still dangerous, because when Dos Santos saw him hunch over, he ran in for the kill, and Derrick Lewis threw one of those huge power strikes, and Dos Santos had to back up and then reassess and then slowly go back to picking it apart. And ultimately, what led to the final sequence was Dos Santos threw an overhand right, not with much of a setup, but this is where speed comes into play. And because he's quicker than Derrick Lewis, even though there wasn't much of a setup, his overhand right was able to land before Derrick could block or get out of the way. So can't wait to see this fight. It's going to be exciting. I think it's going to end in a knockout. Oh, and by the way, so real quick with Tuivasa, the thing I saw in his last fight against Sakai, where he ended up winning by KO, is that Tuivasa does seem to go to the body much more than Lewis. I wouldn't say that he has the best striking technique, just like Lewis doesn't necessarily have the best striking technique. It's more about power. But Tuivasa does have a pretty good clinch, and he can definitely throw some strikes from the clinch, like he did in his last match. He was able to throw body strikes from the clinch. He was able to throw knees from the clinch, and even when his back was against the fence, he was able to throw strikes from that position. And he ended up finishing Sakai with a very brutal combo. So it's a very similar strategy to Derrick. Is once he has you hurt, that's when he's just going to unload with those combinations, try to punch, even if it's through your blocks, it doesn't matter. That's how he's going to try to finish you. So both of these guys, it should be a really good style matchup to make a very exciting fight. And I can't wait to see someone get knocked out in this fight.
Yeah, this is a fight where I'm excited about the intros. Derrick Lewis is going to come out with some H-Town music, some DJ Screw, something like that. The fight is going to be exciting, and the finish. Who's going to get the highlight finish? Every time Derrick Lewis wins, it's a viral moment. He does something funny. He says something funny. It's authentic. And when, Bam Bam wins, it's the shoey. So they're both going to be exciting to watch, beginning, middle, and end. And I can't wait. Derrick Lewis just is funny as can be, humble. I think they're both people who just have that natural body where I think, like, realistically, they can't really finish each other. They can hurt each other. It's going to be hard to see either one of them getting knocked out. I can see them getting finished and stopped. But they're just so big and so powerful that they've taken such big hits and not been, like, stopped completely dead. And very exciting to watch. Yeah, it's going to be a good one to watch.
That's a good point. When I say the knockout, I do agree that both of them have a really good chin, so not necessarily that someone's going to get punched and their lights are actually out and they're laying there unconscious. I agree. When I've seen Derrick Lewis lose, I don't think I've ever seen him go into that state, and same thing with Tuivasa. And I do think one of the things that will play a factor is Derrick Lewis having a bit more experience than Tuivasa. Tuivasa himself has admitted that's one of his weak points is trying to gain experience, because like I said, neither one of them really having a martial arts background. They both were just kind of tough guys who joined MMA and have only trained MMA and not nearly as long as a lot of these other guys. So from that perspective, I guess Lewis having that experience advantage is going to play a factor. And I do think the odds makers have this correct at -190, so I wouldn't say it's necessarily a great bet either way if you're looking for value. But I do think Lewis is probably going to come out on top on this one.
Very interesting fight. I'm excited to see them because, like we mentioned, they are both people who knock people out, put them to sleep, and they can't seem to be put to sleep at the moment. They're both fighters who are interesting to watch. Derrick Lewis is one of those fighters that does what people always say. Why don't you just stand up when somebody has you pinned? He just stands up. Like, that is hilarious to watch when somebody who has great ground game has him pinned and he just gets up. And for those of you old school fans, like Undertaker style, just boop, just pops him off. And it's hilarious to watch.
He can take those, like, because of his chin, he can take 3 or 4 punches on the way up, and he'll, absolutely.
That's hilarious to watch every single time.